right, everyone. Welcome to the session on Crosswalk. I think we'll just get started. So before I get going, I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. There's a lot of questions about what Crosswalk is. That's the session. So what I'll say, and I'll say again in a minute, feel free to stop me along the way. So I've kind of made a point here of not assuming people are deeply familiar with either the standards, which most people are, but also with APIs and some of the other technology. I'm not going to bore you with a tutorial, but I find people make assumptions in technology that I'd like to not make. So first, we'll talk a little bit about what led to Crosswalk, what's going on in the industry. A lot of us are aware of this.
Louder, please.
Okay. A lot of us are aware of this. Then we'll talk about, as I say, APIs and software. From there, I'm going to talk about what crosswalking even is. It's actually a term of art that relates to standards that are next to each other. Then we'll get into, I will actually then tell you what crosswalk is. A lot of you already know kind of what the words mean, but by this point you'll understand its role and why we've created it. And then finally, I'll go through some customer examples and where we're seeing crosswalk go into the future. So, I am the general manager of Crosswalk. It is wholly owned by CSI, but set up as its own unit, so it's my fault. That said, honestly, I do rest on the shoulders of some very deep thinking. So, as you'll see in a moment, there's reasons why Crosswalk made sense. It wasn't arrived at lightly. Before I got here, Mark and Velma and some other folks in CSI leadership had been talking about something like this for some time. So it was a lot of consideration that went into it, and you'll see what it's all about. So I am a construction tech geek. So I've written a book, I do a podcast, actually next week I do a quarterly review of some of the data in the industry. I'm really excited that today we published my podcast with Ron, who he goes through a lot of things that this room may know, but the industry could do with hearing about over and over again. What specifiers do, how we do it, what the standards are, and so forth. So kind of good timing. I'm glad it worked out. Thanks again, Ron. So I've been in technology for a long time. In my heart, I'm a product manager. So I care about making products that people are going to use. And you'll hear some of that in how I talk about Crosswalk. That's one of the big focuses. And again, I built my own software a number of different times. So very excited about this. I joined the company at the end of last year. So you're seeing me towards the end of my first year. It's been great. So the backdrop of this, and again, some of this is setting context, but the industry is digitizing, right? We've had BIM for a long time. Along the way, we've had more and more. Accounting has digitized and driven itself into the construction process more than it was. Facilities and field are all, whether it's Tririga, whether it's Procore, so on. And in fact, they're buying and selling each other. There's been some announcements this week that are kind of interesting. I'm not sure if some of you caught some of that. So the point is the industry is digitizing. And that means very often software. So more and more software is becoming part of workflows. In some cases, it's making workflows faster. In some cases, it's making workflows easier to manage, and so on. So as a result, I mentioned this a minute ago, people have made some money. And I tell you this because it speaks to the fact that the industry is going to keep doing this. When LevelSet gets bought by Procore for $500 million, which was yesterday, I think, that gives a lot of people an idea that, wow, I bet you we can do more of that in construction, find me one. So the point is this is going to happen more and more, and it's been going on for a while now, but it's accelerating. Some of you, overall in the construction industry, you get the fact that low interest rates means that money goes places it might not before. VC is one of them, right? Because it's really hard to make good returns in other places, so VC is getting more than it had. So everything from Assemble, I mean, Autodesk is people kind of joke that they buy a lot, so does Trimble. Procore now is public, so they have currency to do the same. The point of all of this is that you're going to see more and more options. And that was going on when we thought of when the decision to make Crosswalk first happened. This just is an illustration of how much investment is going into the industry. And you see some big chunks when big things happen, but the overall point is it continues to grow. And I think at the end of this year, it'll be a record again. So this is what it's led to. Some of you have seen some of this. This is one snapshot of all the technology in construction. Not all of it's software, but all of it is using digital means to get things done. And that got us thinking, all right, well, what can we do to support that? What can CSI do to make it easier for people to provide value to the industry, and that led to a lot of this thinking as well. There's another slide that drives this. Raise your hand if you've seen this before, and raise your other hand if you're annoyed by it. So this was McKinsey's 2017 study, and it was sort of like the report that launched 1,000 startups. I've gone into the BLS data under it. It's a little bit overstated, but okay. But the general point that you heard finally we're not hearing it quite so much, but in every startup pitch, people would show this and say, oh my God, the industry is not productive, and my startup's going to totally solve it. Many, many millions of dollars have been raised on that premise, which I think is a little simplistic, but nevertheless, it's out there. And the sense that construction as a life cycle could be more productive or could be more, better served by technology is firmly out there. And I think that's true. Every sector is going to benefit from new ways of doing things, especially if they're handled correctly. I tell you all this just to say that there is a lot of pressure in the market and there's a lot of increasing things happening. So again, that starts to speak to where Crosswalk fits. So I'm doing a little setup here. The next thing I want to do, I mentioned this in the beginning, is I want to level set a little bit on what APIs even are. Everyone in the room has heard that. Half of you may know that it's application programming interface, but that may be where it ends. So I'm a big believer in making sure we define terms. Yep. So the first thing I want to start with is APIs are first and foremost about passing data back and forth, right? So the way that software augments human effort is generally through data or doing something with data, right? So it can be specifications, it can be changes, it can be content of specifications, it can be design parameters, it can be field progress, it can be finance. I mean, there's just tons of data that's getting generated. The issue with that is it used to be hard to share. I was hoping I'd get a little chuckle. But so before, there used to be another kind of API called SOAP. That's not really worth getting into. It was hard to do. It's hard to make one system speak to another. Even for the 20 years that the internet was around, from around 93 until about 2013, around then is when we started to get a new kind of API called RESTful. It's not important what that means, it's just easier. That's all. The big thing is it's a lot easier to work with. So the point is, it used to be hard to move around, which meant people did less. Even when the web connected everything, it was really hard to talk about what your data even is and how do I connect it to somebody. How do you even connect it to somebody? How can we do anything with this? So even recently when we had the web, because that's when I say, oh, it used to be hard to pass it around, people will often say, well, the internet means you can connect everything. But that isn't true. It means that you can pass files around, but it doesn't mean that the files can talk to each other. It doesn't mean that you can do things with it. So I give an example of a difficult, that's me Googling difficult to order meal. For a reason, that is setting up a metaphor. So the way I like to explain APIs is it's like getting food from McDonald's. You have to ask for it the way they want you to. You can't go up and say, give me a Whopper, right? You may get a frown. They're not going to know what to, they may know what to give you, but you only can get what they offer. So APIs are prepared with some set of data types. Somebody has to prepare inside the software what can be offered through it, just like McDonald's. You can't go get a steak at McDonald's. Right? So that's why I like this analogy. You have to tell them, they'll tell you how to ask for it. APIs are the same way. You have to say, I want the information from the financial information from last quarter. There will be a way to ask for that they specify. It's beyond this discussion because it's usually pretty code-looking things, but nevertheless, they're saying, if you want a sausage McMuffin with egg, you got to ask me for a sausage McMuffin with egg, or you'll get a McGriddle. And who wants a McGriddle? some hunger out there. But the other piece of that is because you know how to ask for it, they've already prepared the right thing, you know what you're going to get. And that's a key interface. APIs, that's the name, they're all about defining what amounts to a contract. So you agree to do things based on how I ask for them, and I'm going to give you things based on how you've asked for them. You can order 100 of these in the case of not a McGriddle, but a muffin, and it's going to be the same, and that's again the promise of an API. And the point of that is if I'm building software And I know that if I ask for something the way you tell me to, and every time I ask for it, it's going to come the way I want it to be, or at least the way we've agreed it'll come, I can count on it now, and I can build processes around it. So that's the reason why you hear about APIs so often, is they allow people to pull out features and functions that they used to have to build on their own. Who here is signed into a website with Google or Facebook or LinkedIn, or those of you who haven't know that you can? That's using an API. So they'll ping you, and if you're already signed into whatever that social network is, and everybody does it now, Apple does it, so on, that's an API. And that means that that website doesn't have to have you go through all of the pain of entering your name and verifying who you are and so on. That sort of thing happens more and more, and modern software often is seeing what I can pull out and not have to build myself. Because the trouble with building software is I have to maintain it. In a year, I have to worry about whether that code is old. So APIs allow people not to have to think about things. For example, master format. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. So I mentioned that it's a little bit not English. This is what Crosswalk's some of it anyways, our documentation looks like. Right, so it's pretty specific, but this is the right crowd to be talking about specific things. But this is their version of how you do your job. So you go, and actually I'm really proud of the fact that we get complimented a lot by partners about how well this was built, and I can't claim credit for that. It was the CSI team and my predecessor. But anyway, so what this is telling somebody, here's how to ask for what you want. And a GET is a particular thing, a GET request. So the real takeaway from this is that an API is a contract for how to get information reliably and in a way that you understand. Does that make sense? Great. Now you all know what an API is. The day is not wasted. So in summary, they're an incredibly flexible, standardized way to provide and access data of almost any kind. So people use this, a great example, Autodesk has their Forge platform, and you can do amazing things with that, to be honest. I'm not going to sing praises of companies too often, but there are a number of companies that use APIs to make their software dramatically more valuable. Procore does this with their marketplace. Autodesk does it with Forge. There's a couple others that are doing this. And you're going to see that more and more. I believe BSD does some things, but I'm a little less familiar with that. So the key thing here is the team saw that software is becoming more and more a part of how we do our jobs. Whatever part of the ecosystem you're in, you're either handing things to someone using software or you're using it directly. So the point was, and the idea was, great, how do we support that? How do we lower the barrier? A moment ago I mentioned APIs mean you don't have to build something. So now imagine you have a great idea for how to make specifications work, or quantities work, or anything that gets organized by master format, uniformat, or Omniclass, which is a lot of things, as we'll talk about in a moment. By abstracting that away, by making that into an API, we make it easier for startups to launch their idea, and frankly, we're getting a lot of that. It's actually kind of exciting. So, the next piece. What is a crosswalk? What do we mean when we say that? Did we choose that because we like Abbey Road?
Yes.
It was a consideration, I'm sure. But actually, crosswalk is a term of art. It comes from when there are standards that overlap. I'm probably telling you, yeah. So the world is loaded with standards. We obviously have 3 that we're immensely proud of, and more actually when you get into some of the other CSI standards. There's 3 that I spend a lot of time on. Many of these overlap. As you know, some of our 3 do overlap. Many address the same thing from a different angle. Again, if that sounds familiar. And many are almost completely duplicative. So Omniclass has tables that are uniformat and master format, right? So you're duplicating something. So we're not the first time that's happened. ISO, all I gotta do is tell you ISO, you're like, yeah, I know. But ASTM, lots of other standards making and classifications publishing entities have things that overlap like this. So the idea of a crosswalk is, well, if I've got it classified this way, but my workflow needs it that way, how do I reclassify it? And that's where the term of art crosswalk comes from. So I can promise you there was a long process of name development, and the first word that came out was crosswalk, and then a month later, hey, let's do crosswalk. A little lesson in naming right there. So this is the key of what crosswalk as an API does. And again, I'll get into that a little bit more, but we are there to help 2 things. One of them is to access the standards in a way that is better than a PDF, because it's just much more flexible. And the second reason is to transclassifies, kind of a word I keep using. Don't look it up. I don't think it exists, but it gives you an idea of what I mean. If you've got it in master, a great example of what we get a lot of is things that were generated in master format 95, and someone has to now make them useful for modern workflows. This happens in finance a lot, where master format gets used as cost codes, or the basis of cost codes. So, enter our standards. So we have the three big ones: master format, uniformat, and Omniclass. We have one of the ASTM standards. These are all, again, they all overlap. They describe similar things, and they can be duplicative. So this is why crosswalking made so much sense. And in the case of I'm really excited about one of the uniformats too. We just did that, Ron just did that crosswalk a couple of months ago. And what's interesting about this is these three are CSIs, so we know them well. But what was really great about the experience of pulling in a non-CSI standard is getting the experience of how hard or easy that can be and how to treat judgment calls, right? Because sometimes it's not obvious where something should go because we sliced the onion differently, the apple or whatever. So they're judgment calls, and that's actually one of the big benefits of Crosswalk is somebody who's thought about it and is thinking about it has chosen what to make the equivalences of, point one. Whereas it's not somebody running a project and they just need to get it done, which happens a lot in software. The other thing, though, is that it's consistent. So the decisions that we've made are available, and they're the same every time you use them, which also helps. Because there are, I'll bet you if I asked, at least one person in this audience has an Excel spreadsheet that goes from master format to uniformat. So what if you have one and another person has another? Like, a lot of times it's fine, but at other times it's not so much. So it's nice that there is a kind of received wisdom. Don't blush. But there's well, I'm kidding. But there is a consistent way that those decisions have been made, because they really are judgment calls. It could go one way or the other. So this is sort of what, now you understand the reason in the industry of why it made sense to do an API. Now we have a sense of what an API even is. And it really makes sense that crosswalking is a great use of an API. And I'll tell you why. Imagine you've got 1,000 things classified in uniformat in a spreadsheet or whatever it is. Having to do that individually is brutal. Having to do that with software is, boom, 1,000 API calls that happen so quickly that you don't even notice it, right? So this is one of those moments where software can absolutely save a lot of time. And I think you'll notice that software, when it isn't creating headaches, not that that ever happens, it's very good at the tedium. It's very good at helping with the stuff that people hate. And having to translate back and forth is certainly one of those. So we're pretty excited about offering that capability. I'm going to stop. Are there any questions?
I have one. Does this all assume that the industry uses the terms, the numbers from master format exactly throughout?
That's a great question. It does. It does. And one of the areas so I talked about myself as a product manager, and one of the things product managers do, I run the business, but I focus on the product a lot. What should we build next? And one of the areas that is out there is, can we create a database so that if you have appended, that's what happens a lot, is people will append master format. It is okay if people have the spacing wrong, like it can handle, because that happens all the time. If someone is totally taking it somewhere differently, there's no software that can handle that.
Okay, like master format uses 13, 16, and so forth over and over and over again in places that are kind of important in my work, writing specifications. My architects don't understand 4 numbers. 6 numbers is totally beyond their comprehension. So when I can, I drop those last 2 numbers and make them 0, 0, or I might use a 1, 0 or a 0, 5. But I never use 13 or 16. Am I totally outside of this?
I think we'd have to talk about it. Like, the other thing that's worth knowing is we purposely didn't make end user software. So a way around what you're talking about, and this happens a lot, is we are either integrated into software, so they make these calls, or there is an IT team who's written a little bit of code to look it up. And that's probably the way we deal with what you're talking about, where you constrain it so that, because the reason you have so many numbers is so that you can be specific to a big, wider group. But if you know you're only dealing with a kind of a narrow subset,
I don't write master stuff.
You can. But my point is, you can write code that says he's only going to be thinking about these. So, You know what I mean? Fill in the
Yes,
blank.
one more question, is an extension of that, and I'll shut up.
That's all right. I got bags of time. You guys are here with me.
Terminology, every number means a word, but the words are used differently by different people across the country. Curtain wall versus window wall versus storefront.
Yeah.
How do we work that into this type of a system?
Again, we are right now sticking with master format as written, 95 and then the modern version.
But even in master format, sometimes they mean 4 or 5 different words.
So the title itself, all the way out, is how you would disambiguate that. And if there's further disambiguations, I mean, that's going to happen. So the reality is the standards are the standards. So an equivalent of that is, what if somebody has something in master format that is too specific for uniformat? Because that happens. We handle it by giving you the next highest one up. So if there is an ambiguity, the best way that you can do that, and we flag it, we say that there's no equivalent. That would be the thing here, is if there's 2 of them coming back, we'll give you both back.
So you're working from, are you working from broad scope, medium scope, or narrow scope on your master format levels?
It will return whatever you ask it for. So if you ask it for, all 4.
Broad scope would be the first 4 digits, 00.
Yeah.
And then narrow scope, medium scope, and then
That's right.
narrow scope takes it out further.
So it will return whatever you give it at that level. So if you ask for like 03, it'll tell you what 03 is and nothing under. And if you ask for under that, you see what I'm saying? So it'll return the level you ask for, not everything under it. So if you ask for the highest level, it's going to return what the highest level division
Would
title.
be division.
That's right.
And then
That's right.
broad scope, which would be, okay.
That's right.
Today. Is that what you were asking, John?
No, but that's okay. He gave me exactly what I wanted.
Why are we still using 95 master format when the idea with 04,
Yeah.
which is now 14 or whatever the latest has been, and we're promoting the use of archaic systems that his architects tend to use or want to use it, or something, even the other industries, banking, etc. Why can't we help push them forward? Or are we just trying to capture everybody that we can?
You have to be where people are. I mean, great example, a general contractor from the Southeast, they had all their cost codes in 95. And they don't want to go change that because people are scared to death of financial records, but they want to be able to access them in the so I get what you mean, is by making this available, are we sort of, slowing the trend? But the reality is, there are a lot of people who are 40 years into their career who are doing they're going to do what they do. And you know what I mean? So we get architects and we get other people that do things in 95, and we don't get to tell them to change. We can suggest it and offer it, but we have to be backwards. This is an example of backwards compatibility. Anyone else? Excellent. I love those kinds of questions, though. Is how is this actually working for people? One of the questions I want to revisit real quick. Okay.
Just picking up to build off of that question. I mean, you still are basing it on the current version of master format as well, or
Yes.
not?
Yes.
So you really are carrying both, sets of numbers, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, all of them. So the point of this is, these are databases. These are that it's not a lot of cost for us to carry more of them, but we want to make this as useful as possible. And like I said, this doesn't even cover everything people do, right? But the more we can be valuable to the industry and allow content to flow wherever it needs to go, the better.
So you're building in backward compatibility, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, also, we don't run around telling everyone that. Like when we no, I know it sounds funny, but we'll say we have master format, we have uniformat, and we have Omniclass, and now we have ASTM 155E1557. I don't tell people we have 95 until they say, well, I've got 95, what am I going to do? And it's like, funny you should ask. So we're actively not promoting it, but we need to be available and ready for the fact that people still generate in that using that classification, and old things are in that classification. And it's surprising, if you think about a project team, there's often a lot of people that are contributing here or there. So it's still pretty common, like it or not. One thing I do want to just kind of mention again is we're not, some of what you're asking is also, that's what software would decide to do. What we do is you ask us a question and we tell you what it's equivalent to. And then your software says, great, then now I know where to stick those 1,000 cells of data, but it's the software that does the moving. We don't grab data, thank God. Like, well, I don't want to get near project data because the risk and all that. So what we do is, as an API, we work with the software to tell it what buckets to put it in. Does that make sense? So I don't have databases where if you wanted to take those 1,000 cells and move them from 95 to 2020, I'm not going to take all of those and then give them back to you. I'm going to say, here's where they all go. And that's how APIs generally work, as opposed to end user software. The decision was purposely made, intentionally made, not to make end user software, because we're here to support the industry, not compete with it. So we may make some things that get there, like a plugin or two with Procore or whatever, but they're really meant to be supporting people using it the way they want to. So I mean, one of the other things that starts to come out is our standards get used for lots of different things. I've mentioned finance a few times. They get used for safety data. They get used for BIM sub-assemblies. You'll see in a moment what I mean by that. They get built, obviously building products and financial. So what is happening with Crosswalk is we're finding that people use these standards in surprising ways because they're powerful and they're well thought through. So we get companies that are using it in interesting ways, and the API makes that more possible and easier for people to do. So when you think of it as CSI members, one of the benefits of Crosswalk is it makes these standards available beyond where they might otherwise have been used. I'm not saying we're changing the world, we're just making it possible and more fluid for data to flow back and forth. So where the standards, I mean, again, you probably know this, but we're embedded in more and more software. So these are just a quick example, but it keeps happening, which is great. In an era where you standards, you could go without standards. You can directly connect data flows if you want. People like these standards because they're tried and tested. People know them, and they don't have to figure it out. Which trying to do a new classification is harrowing. At least one person in this room knows what I mean. So, anyway, this is sort of the announcement slide, which I've now told you 5 times. But in 2020, we launched this. So Crosswalk was launched May the 4th last year. The Star Wars. I've gotten that wrong and gotten killed for it. But the Star Wars jokes are not funny anymore, but you get what I mean. So May the 4th. So the idea here is to connect all of the dots that I just talked about. So how are we empowering modern industry critical standards and modern data flows? And we're setting ourselves up as CSI to continue to be part of these workflows going forward, wherever the industry may choose to take them. I mean, there's a general sense that innovation is just getting started and how buildings get pulled together and done safely and done efficiently and so on. There's just a lot of movement and we don't know where it'll land. So our task is to be relevant and helpful as that transition happens, and that's what Crosswalk is a big part of. And here's the logo. Oh yeah, drums. I forgot I put that there. So it is an industry first. We don't know, I've never heard of this happening elsewhere. There are companies, there are entities in Europe, one in particular, that has something similar in that it's more of a data dictionary because they've got a lot of things coming together. But in the US, this is the first time these are all coming together. And it's been a pretty good ride. So we're about 18 months into it. Easily integrated into software, so it almost gets technical how we've made it easy for people to use, but there's a lot of ways that there's a thing called GraphQL, which people, even nerdier than me, think is the coolest thing ever, which makes me kind of feel good about myself. Easily transclassifying from one standard to another. And again, as we've now discussed a lot, including 95 to 2020. And there's discussion now about what else do we do? Does it make sense to get like the UK standard Uniclass? I need people to know to tell me they're going to use it, which is sort of some of the discussions we're having. Another thing that kind of came up a moment ago is it isn't uncommon for people to append master format because they have more specific needs or they're for whatever reason. Well, that's just a database table. So for us to do that and everybody that is using this gets what we call an API key. It's basically a password. So for us to do that is also possible. We just need people to say, I'm going to use this and here's how. Because for me to build it based on my intuition is a recipe for software no one wants to use. So as we think, and this is actually kind of an appeal to you and your broader networks, as you think about this, if there are ways that you're like, you know, if only it did this, I'm wide open to hearing about that. The team is wide open to hearing about that, because our job is to make this as useful to real workflows as we can. Sorry, this is a bit of word salad up here, but it's a platform for development. So it's, I mentioned this before, the people that built this are two telecom CIOs, so they were a little uptight about how, I mean, it's built, I'm really lucky. What I mentioned a moment ago, we can continue to build features, things that make it more useful without it being end user software. The tables I mentioned are one. Other standards, the limit to how many standards I think we want to pull together. Again, Omniclass might be one, some of the other ASTM standards have kind of come up, but people need to tell me we need this, and here's how we'll use it, and we'll figure it out. So that's what I've now been saying. My job is to understand what will actually be used, right? Because there's so many standards out there. We could spend all day for 2 years, you know, trying to figure out how to make them crosswalk each other, and if no one needs them, we haven't done anything. So that's sort of the driver. For those of you who'd like to learn more, this isn't the end of the presentation, but I have to show you the websites, or I feel like I missed something. So we have 2 websites. One of them is a little more marketing focused. Frankly, it's fine. I kind of like to send people to the other one, which is crosswalk.digital. If you just type that in, your browser will do the rest. And the reason I like that is it speaks a little more clearly to this as technology. The concept of what it does, we've now talked about a number of times, and this covers it too. But this is something you can hand over to somebody who understands how to work with it, to really understand it. So what we've got in here, for those of you who don't spend a lot of time with APIs, these are some videos that just talk about how it works, which are nice. They're not particularly technical. But also this does get a little on the technical side, but you know it's there. The other piece, you saw some of this earlier. So what's fun about this is it tells you how to get a key and how to play with it. We have to approve that, but I'm pretty good about letting people work with it a little bit to see. The other thing that's interesting in here, again, for those of you who are anywhere near software, GitHub is where a lot of things get stored, so you can go and play with it on GitHub, and there's another thing called Postman. The reason I tell you all this is it's built to be used. It's organized so that it's easy for people to play around with it. And I mentioned in the beginning, an API is essentially a contract where you say, if I ask for it this way, you're going to give it back to me that way. What Postman allows people to do is, without building any software, understand what they're going to get back. So they don't have to spend any time or money. That's the whole point. So we built it on there so that people can assess whether this is interesting before they get somebody to go spend a bunch of money and time building real software. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of how we're seeing this. So in addition to getting so excited about what the API can do, my job is to listen to software and help them to integrate. So one of the places that there's a lot of attention now actually going to pre-construction. And as specifiers, that's obviously an area we care about as well, because sometimes value engineering undoes all of our hard work. Was that it? Yes. So a lot of these involve moving specifications, requirements, quantities back and forth from master format and into Omniclass. We help to do this quickly. So there's a couple of platforms and actually a couple of general contractors talking to us about using Crosswalk for that as well. And the idea there is to make it more fluid so they can actually talk to people more. And in fact, one of these platforms that I'll mention right now actually, well, before I get there, again, you have this idea that instead of homegrown translations written by somebody who doesn't really understand the standards, like a software engineer, there's no reason to think that they're going to be a good judge of what is equivalent to what, as opposed to someone who spent 40 years in the industry and really does. So it's nice that now there is a kind of a canonical way to do those transclassifications. Yeah, I've now covered this 50 times. I tend to do that, but again, it requires judgment. Right, so now we know that there is a consistent judgment as opposed to these ad hoc judgments of what is equivalent to what. And I was mentioning earlier, Uniformat 2 or ASTM E1557. I was surprised at how different they are. I mean, I wouldn't always know, but there was a lot of work that went into making that crosswalk work. So if you're getting a software developer to do that, it's a recipe for confusion for sure. So Join is the company I was mentioning a second ago. So this is a middling, early stage company who is focused on the pre-construction process. Specifically, you'll be happy to hear, connecting teams so that it's a little less contentious than it can sometimes be. They are using master format for intake a lot, and now can support uniformat. So we've not only helped them with some of these translations, we've opened up their eyes to the fact that they can now do more than they otherwise might have. And this is early. We signed them about 4 months ago. But it was exciting because it's one of those places where I think Crosswalk is going to be particularly valuable. I guess it just does that. Building products is kind of an obvious one. So BSD was an early partner in Crosswalk. So is Suites and some others. Sometimes they're just using the standard, sometimes they're integrating the API. One of the interesting things about Crosswalk when it comes to established businesses is they often have code bases that are massive, so integrating us sometimes is a process. And thankfully, we've got a team to support that. So it isn't just, here it is, and I hope it works for you. We've got a team to help people with integrations. So I mentioned this one as well. Contractors sometimes use master format for cost codes. This is also where sometimes you see some of the changes and additions, but it's often based on master format. And a lot of them have this problem. I've just come into it a number of times. I happen to talk to a lot of contractors for those other podcasts and all that stuff. So it does come up. And again, we can help with translating and updating. Interestingly, the software that we're connecting to is terrible at this. So one of our challenges is helping them to do things they didn't contemplate. Because again, just like a specifier may or may not know how software works, the converse I can tell you is even more true. Is that they're deep into their languages and so on and so forth, so they often don't think of this until we come to them. An interesting one is, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this, but BIM is often using Omniclass. It's just, when they're using standards, we see a lot that Omniclass is used. So we've had a number of and the other thing that some of you may be aware is the pace of innovation at Revit has been less than torrid. Into the mic. So as a result, though, there's been huge innovation outside of Revit. So Revit add-ins, there's 1,100 of them, I believe, on the Forge platform. That's the last I looked. Which is, God bless them, that they at least made that possible. But as a result, we get Revit plugins and people that are making Revit-based products that come to us and say, a lot of what they'll do is they'll have a library. In the library, in one case, it was 27,000 sub-assemblies and models and so on and so forth. And he uses Omniclass, but he wanted to be able to translate it into, I believe it was uniformat. And Crosswalk was perfect for that. So this company, Collectus, just came out a couple of months ago. Really great use of Crosswalk. We were pretty proud of this. This team, they've got 50 brands up there, which is sort of funny, but they are which happens a lot in software. They're also a service provider, so they do a lot of Revit, they do a lot of BIM, but they said let's make some software. And here's another example of it. So they're able to support multiple standards-based workflows in and out of Revit, because some of this isn't it, some of it's just databases as well. Does that make sense? Great. So those are some examples of where we're seeing it be used. So whether it's pre-con, whether it's BIM, I think there's a lot of potential for us with BIM. Estimating and finance, there's a lot of that baked in, which we're discovering, where we can help people be a little bit more flexible and make their software support the industry more. And where do we see this going? So I mentioned before that there's a lot of data that gets managed with these standards, not just specifications and building products. People use it for a lot of building information and a lot of, in fact, even at the facilities management level. So what we're seeing is thinking of this, especially because it's an API, as a data conduit. How can you organize, whether it's OSHA data or what, there's a lot of things that can be organized by these standards. So as we continue to develop, we're looking at how we can support people with these. Now, again, we don't make the software. We're looking to help people to build better software. But it creates a new way for design and construction data to flow. And that, you're going to see more and more of that. you're going to see more and more of discussion of data. You're going to see more and more of how can we use data to collect and then analyze and optimize how our workflows work. And hopefully, budgets get a little better and on time gets a little bit better and rework is a little bit less of a thing. It's a big thing at the moment. I am not the software guy telling you that if only you used Crosswalk, all the rework would be gone. Of course, that's not true. But we're here as CSI to support the industry and help people to develop solutions that begin to address that. One of the other areas, so I've talked about software a lot, and then this is just a little geeky moment for me. But what happens with APIs, because they're so useful, is people start to create networks of them. So in a lot of larger companies, there are things like, you can't really read it, but Dell Boomi is a brand you may have heard of. Azure does this. MuleSoft just got bought by about a year and a half ago by Salesforce. What they do is they'll pull in a lot of APIs, and then you can make them available to everyone in the organization. This isn't for a 10-person design firm. This is usually a bigger company. But a lot of these GCs and even the design companies are thousands of folks, so this makes sense. So they're all creating inside of their companies what they call an iPaaS, an integration platform as a service, and that's what these are. The reason I tell you that is as we're thinking about Crosswalk into the future, we start to become part of the fabric of workflows instead of a specific thing people ask for. So we're able to license that way, we're able to integrate that way, and we're able to support that. And we're not alone in this. There's a lot of different APIs. That's the thing. Is if you only need a little sliver of service, why get a whole lot of software? Let's integrate it into our system so anyone who's signed in as Gensler or as DPR can access this with they have to write a little bit of code, but not very much. That's what modern IT teams are spending a lot of their time with, is configuring APIs and configuring some of these things so they don't have to write code all day long. And we've had some really great inbound inquiries that, oh my God, you think construction takes long? Getting one of these things together takes an eon, because there's cybersecurity in it anyway, but it's for the future. We view it as really exciting. So one of the things that we're getting to the end, so thank you everyone for your patience, but one of the things that was part of the original vision that I want to make sure I share, the first thing we launched was an API. The next thing that is on our there's a lot of little features that I'm going to create along the way, but as an organization, CSI has sort of coalesced around a vision for the future that will be at the pace that the market is ready for. I'm not going to go build a bunch of stuff that no one needs yet. But what we see coming is as this data begins to aggregate and we're able to manage it, you can start to do some things that augment processes, and that's where AI comes in. It isn't going to be taking over jobs or doing anything that sophisticated. I mentioned before, software is very good at handling tedium. AI often means you're handling slightly more complicated tedium. But it's not good enough to make real judgments. And there is no architecture I know of that's good enough to make real judgments yet. So this is more about making increasingly valuable augments to what people do. The next piece, which is coming, it's on its way, is blockchain. So I mentioned before, passing data back and forth. Well, transactional data or job complete data for subcontractors and so on and so forth. You're seeing more and more of that, and that's the sort of thing that our standards are a great way to manage. So we're exploring blockchain. The issue with it sometimes is it can be very energy intensive. There are ways to do it that are less so, that are still getting worked out. And the final one is Internet of Things. So what we found, in job sites is people don't put sensors after the pilot. This is just generally true, is that they'll do it for a pilot, and it's great, we've got all this data, and then later on in the next project, no one does it. So IoT is a little slower in construction than people expected it might be, but that's changing as machine vision does some of what, anyway, the point is IoT is on its way, and you're gonna see that in supply chains probably more than you are on job sites, for the obvious reason that you're tracking stuff, going hundreds of miles. There's some really great solutions coming out, they're just a little bit early. So, the Crosswalk was created to integrate the standards and by extension specifications more efficiently into modern workflows, and that is our lodestone. By creating this API, we let the market decide what workflows are, and we're going to be ready wherever the technology leads. That's why we built it as an API and not software that you can just kind of sign up for. And that is it. Time for questions. Sir.
So if CSI didn't pick up the mantle to do this, would they there been other people in the industry that would have capitalized on this opportunity and maybe hedged us out, or maybe not looking at it?
Funny you should ask that question. I hinted at a European group, Building Smart. They do things like this. So yes, probably. And if it wasn't them, there's it's not crazy that someone would have published an equivalent that is more limited than what we did, right? Just 2 standards, for example. So, and I mean, like I said, there's probably 5-10 people in the audience right now who've kind of done their own. So figuring that out is, someone may have done that. That's right.
A lot of guys could have been competitive, I guess.
But that's purposely, they're going to have to license our IP no matter what. So even if they did that, they're going to have to license it. So
If we didn't have the AP, they could have done it themselves.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Anything else?
Would you possibly, you said, finding the equivalent standards and everything, is there something that you could, identify because sometimes I'll run into products that only have European standards.
Yeah.
I can't use those in the United States, and I gotta find an American standard that is equivalent that I can use in my specifications. And that's not always easy.
No, I can imagine. What standards are you finding? Omniclass I mentioned.
Mostly it's in cabinetry,
Okay.
Occasionally some, waterproofing materials.
But what's the standard that the class that the
Oh, geez.
Okay, well, you've answered my question. It's not Omniclass, you
Yes,
remember.
no.
So it starts to be a little bit of a problem because once you get past some of the big ones, there's a lot of standards out there. There's a
Yeah.
lot of, you know what I mean? Like each specialty often has its own and so on. So some of this has to be a decision of what can we support without. So if you think about it as a daisy chain or the telephone game, everyone's familiar with the telephone game. So if I'm making equivalences, by the time I've done too many of those in a row, you run into a problem.
Mhm.
The other way to do that, which is I think how some other folks have done it, is with data dictionary, where there's like this is Apple and everything is translated to and from that. Does that make sense? We're not built like that right now. So I'm keenly aware of what you mean. It's just the size of the problem versus the number of people that need it is something we still struggle with.
It's European and Canadian.
Yeah. Well, Canadians hopefully are on board.
Those shoes are usually easier, but I still have to
Yeah.
find an equivalency.
Yeah.
I work with quite antiquated military standards.
I feel safer already.
Do you have any plans for that?
So we actually, interesting, are speaking with someone from APART, I mean, it's a big organization. They're using some of our standards for some things. This is someone from the Navy. I need to talk, so no, we don't have plans to do that actively. But like I've been kind of saying, is that if there is a need for it and we can identify that there'll be a lot of use, then we're open to doing that for sure.
I'm translating old military standards to ISO standards, which is a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I can imagine. Happy to have the conversation for sure. Like understanding what's going on in the market, I'm happy to understand that. I think what I understand is within the military, there's a fair number of little silos doing different things. So it starts to be, and there's an effort, I understand, to unify that, but
Yeah.
it's a big job. And, I don't think it's a general driving it, but I have no idea.
A lot of the mill standards are outdated.
I know.
Yes, sir.
So there's a website where we can watch your progress, buy or lease your software.
That's right. So crosswalk.digital, the main page has updates about what's happening.
Okay.
If you want to understand what's happening as a business, you'd have to ask. We're not going to publish that necessarily. Although we do, when good things happen, we talk about them with press releases for sure. But the technical side of it, every time something changes, we put it up there. Well, thank you all. I'm here for the next couple days, so thank you.